Playing The Witcher 3, I just couldn't help but feel the need to compare it to the Netflix adaptation of the Witcher books. Although even calling what Netflix did an adaptation is a massive stretch. Normally, when adapting books and turning them into a show or a movie, the idea is to retell the story through a different visual medium. The idea is to still tell the same story as it is written in the source material. That changes happen during the adaptation and that things get changed or removed is nothing new and not necessarily a bad thing. Not everything that works on screen also works in the books, and not everything that works in the books will work on screen. But The Witcher Netflix doesn't just change certain story and plot lines, it literally is telling its own story. Only about 5% of what you see in the show actually happens in the books. Not to mention that most characters in the show are completely original and don't exist in the source material. The show has barely anything in common with the source and even changed the lore. Not a little bit, but so massively that it might as well be a completely different world. All of this wouldn't even be a big deal had the showrunners not openly lied to us, the fans. Many times did they assure us on Twitter and various interviews that this show would be very accurate and not do the same mistakes Game of Thrones did during their later seasons. They told us that they wouldn't dare change the story fundamentally as the books already offer lots of great material. All of that was false, they lied directly to our faces. The Witcher 3 on the other hand never claimed to be something it's not. It never claimed to be a faithful adaptation, nor did it claim to be 100% original. It managed to faithfully bring the characters and the world of the books to life, while still giving them their own spin. Like Geralt being less depressive and more emotional, but not so much that he could be considered a different character, or giving Triss a much bigger role and much bigger and larger tits. I do like Henry Cavill as Geralt. He's an amazing actor and you can see that he actually cares about the character and the world. Not to mention that he, unlike most of his co-stars or even scriptwriters, actually did read the books and play the video games. Now, I'm not saying that actors should or need to play or read the source material their roles are based off, but it is a nice touch and shows the commitment of an actor. Unfortunately, I feel like this is one thing that Henry might be overdoing. He very clearly is not his own character. Watching him on screen, as someone that played and read the books, you will quickly notice that he tries to copy or imitate Dark Cockle's version of The Witcher, the one from the third game. Dark Cockle, for those that don't know, is the voice actor of Geralt of Rivia from the video games. Henry constantly grunts and acts like he barely cares about anything going on around him most of the time. He's jacked as hell and looks like he's the fantasy version of John Rambo. Although to be fair, at the end of the day, his job is to act. It's not his fault that the scripts he's being given are bad. But why does a multi-million-dollar company do a much worse job than CD Projekt Red that, during the development of The Witcher 3, was nowhere near as successful or resourceful as they are now? Yet they still managed to release a masterpiece that keeps being talked about as one of the best games ever made to this very day, 7 years after release. Because CD Projekt Red actually cared about the characters and the lore. When you play The Witcher 3, you never get the feeling that something is out of place or is forced into the story. You never feel like the story is full of plot holes or makes no sense. Which is not to say that The Witcher 3 has no plot holes, but they are usually so far in between and so insignificant that you either don't notice them or just don't feel as bothered by them as you do in the Netflix show. The video games not only manage to introduce hundreds of characters, but they also make you care about most of them. CD Projekt takes their time in letting the gamers get to know and develop a relationship with the humans and monsters of this world. Netflix rushes from scene to scene, never fully fleshing out any of the people we see on screen. The relationship Geralt has with Ciri in the show feels very unnatural, unearned and not believable. They barely know anything about each other. Why did Ciri run into Geralt's arms at the end of season 1? How did she even know what he looked like? Yes, they were linked together by fate, but that doesn't mean that she can see his name flying above his head. In the books and in the game, Ciri is like a daughter to Geralt and Yennefer. She's the only child they have and will ever have. The show fails to make us care about her or her relationship with Geralt. The Witcher 3 follows the classic rule of show but don't tell, while Netflix keeps spamming us with loads of dialogue and names without actually bothering to explain 90% of them. When your story takes place in a fantasy world, you can't just be randomly throwing out fantasy names of locations or characters without explaining them to the viewers or readers. You can't expect that people will know what you're talking about or brush it off. The only thing this will accomplish is to confuse the consumers. Witcher 3 always explains new lore related things to the players. They have a compendium explaining most characters and places, but of course, no one expects Netflix to do something like that. But watching the Netflix show, you never feel like what you're watching is legendary or will have an impact on pop culture or the industry like Game of Thrones or The Witcher 3 did. Game of Thrones had a massive impact and will forever be remembered as one of the best TV shows ever made. Same thing goes for The Witcher 3. It already is seen as a legendary game by most gamers, and you won't find a top 10 open world list without The Witcher being there. That's because the game doesn't rush you. It's not shoving loads of exposition in your face. It gives the players enough time to get familiar with the world, the characters, the monsters, and different factions. Now, of course, there's people saying that the game simply has much more time to tell its story compared to the show. This is only partially true. Yes, of course, playing The Witcher 3, you can easily spend 100 hours in the world. But Netflix, instead of using its limited time to bring us closer to the characters, build their relationships, or expand the world, decided to invent plot lines that end within one episode. They decided to fundamentally change whole plot lines and scenes that had zero reason to be changed and only caused confusion. What happened to Eskel had zero relevancy within the story. It didn't have a big impact on Geralt, nor did it change him. It's brushed off and forgotten so fast that you wonder why they even did that. Netflix The Witcher is not awful, but it's nowhere near the grandness the books or the games have, and will be remembered as a mediocre TV show, if it won't be forgotten.